You're listening to an exclusive episode of the NK News podcast, available only to subscribers. You can listen to this and other episodes from your preferred podcast player by accessing the private podcast feed. For more detailed instructions, please see the step-by-step guide on the NK News website at nknews.org/private-feed. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the NK News podcast. I'm your host, Jacko Zwetsloot, and today it is Wednesday, the 5th of November, 2025, and I'm joined via StreamYard by a brand new guest, and that is Dr. Joëlle Hivonnet, who is a French national who worked for EU institutions for over 30 years and has recently retired. She was posted in Seoul as the number 2 in the EU delegation or embassy to the Republic of Korea from 2016 to 2020. Her other postings include New York, Geneva, Bissau, and Kathmandu. Prior to becoming a European official, Dr. Hivonnet was a senior lecturer at the University of Northumbria in the United Kingdom. Joëlle, welcome on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Jacko, for having me on your podcast, and it was very nice to reconnect during our trip to Korea recently.
That's right, because I knew you during your time here as the EU's chargé d'affaires and deputy head of delegation in Seoul from 2016 to 2020. It was a very interesting period. It, of course, included the 2017-2018 missile escalation from North Korea, lots of testing and nuclear testing also. And then in 2018 and 2019, we had summit diplomacy. So from Brussels' point of view, what was the European Union actually trying to achieve on the Korean Peninsula in those years?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Jacko. I would like just to give a bit of context, because for me, what is interesting to point out is the fact that the mood has changed very much between the time when I was posted in Seoul and what is happening now. And I think you can only understand the EU response to the situation, if very broadly, if I can go back to that time and see how the situation has evolved. I mean, I know it was a time where there were sort of missile testing and nuclear tests as well, but I remember this period as being a period of optimism. I mean, the mood for me was rather positive. We thought we could further engage with the DPRK. If you remember, it was the time of the Winter Olympics. And very symbolically, you had North Korean athletes and South Korean athletes, competing together, albeit in a limited number of events. But that in itself was quite a feat. And also you had this delegation, North Korean delegation that arrived by train, at Seoul station, that was led by the then president of the Presidium, and also to which Kim Jong Un's sister participated. So for me, when I look back on these years, I mean, obviously it was difficult, but the mood was more optimistic. And honestly, even in the EU delegation, we thought, well, maybe we can further engage with the DPRK. Now, if you fast forward to today, what's happened in between, which is also a major factor, you had the COVID pandemic. So that meant, for example, that, the embassies, the foreign embassies in Pyongyang were evacuated. For the record, 6 of our member states had embassies in Pyongyang. Now they're trying to come back, in particular, Germany and Sweden. But it's not a given, and I think I'm not certain that they will be able to come back. And of course, what's happened in the meantime is the DPRK has become more dependent on Russia, and I'm sure we will be able to develop that side. Yeah. And the last point is that Trump was re-elected in 2024. Which is also introducing an element of instability, not just on the Korean Peninsula, but also, worldwide. So for me, this is what we were trying to achieve, and this is a very difficult context in which we can operate as EU.
Yeah. Now, during that time when you were here in 2016 to 2020, did you feel that the European Union was viewed by Seoul as a real stakeholder on peace issues on the Korean Peninsula, or more as a supportive background partner?
Well, that's a very good question. Maybe you should ask your Korean colleagues or our Korean colleagues, what their perception was. I think there always was a given that you could not achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula or bring back the DPRK, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty umbrella without the help of the US. So I think that is a factor, that's a given, that, in those days, nothing could be done without the active involvement of the US. And we saw, basically the US blowing hot and cold, on the Korean Peninsula. And of course, the other factor was China. And on that, I think maybe we were focusing a little bit too much on China. And even at the time, we were not paying enough attention to what was happening across the border between the DPRK and Russia, but that's an apart. So my take would be that although the EU was regarded as an important actor and player, I think it is fair to say that it was probably not regarded as the main actor at the time, and probably still isn't. Although I hope that we will be able to discuss how we have since then, reinforced our cooperation with the Republic of Korea on those matters.
Now, the EU often says that it supports the big goals of complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, human rights improvement, and of course, a stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Now, when you arrived in Seoul, how did those broad goals translate into day-to-day diplomatic work with the Republic of Korea government?
Well, a lot of our work was actually dedicated to monitoring. So you could argue that we were more in, it's not passive attitude, but it was more like we were trying to see how things would develop. And also we were very much supporting the efforts by President Jae-in at the time to try and seek a rapprochement with the DPRK. I mean, since then, we've seen that the DPRK blew up the railway tracks, to the DMZ, and now says that, they're pushing forward with a two-state solution rather than unification. So we were very much supporting President Moon Jae-in's effort to re-enter an active dialogue with the DPRK and to try and promote the peace on the Korean Peninsula. And of course, we were, like everybody else, we were monitoring what was happening on the other side of the DMZ.
Yeah. Is there something in your view that, does the EU have a comparative advantage on DPRK issues, something that it can do better than Washington, Tokyo, or Beijing, or something that it can do that Washington, Tokyo, or Beijing cannot do when it comes to the DPRK?
That's a very tricky one. I think it would be very arrogant of me to say that, we can do better than the rest of the international community. I think we see our efforts, not just when it comes to the DPRK and the Korean Peninsula, as very much part of a broader action. So, for example, and I'm sure we will be able to discuss, EU sanctions, for example. But all of our efforts, are really fall on the, are really part of the efforts of the international community. So I don't know if individually the EU, can achieve more than the other players. But I think what we can bring to the discussion is the fact that we are very good at liaising with other key players. Probably less so these days with the US, because as you probably know, we've got a very difficult dialogue currently with the Trump administration. But we also, we've got a very wide network of embassies. We're talking to a lot of people. And in some cases, we're doing démarches to support not just of our efforts, but also UN efforts, in this area. So I think this is definitely something that we can bring to the action, which is we're a key global player. So, but I wouldn't say that our efforts should be seen as individual efforts. We're very much part of the international community and international community efforts.
You just mentioned a diplomatic word there, a French diplomatic word, as it happens, démarcher. For our listeners who may not be aware, my understanding of that is a political initiative. Is that the right understanding?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So yeah, for the benefit of your listeners, we have 145 delegations stroke embassies in the world. And we are, when we're posted, in those delegations, we are regularly involved in so-called démarches. And what it is that we will approach the authorities of a country, and we will, most of the time, this is really related to UN resolutions or UN efforts. So we will approach the authorities of a given country, and we will explain the position of the EU and why it is important, for example, to support a resolution. So in the case in point, which is the DPRK, where we have both UN sanctions and EU sanctions, we will approach different countries worldwide, and we're going to explain why it is that we're doing what we're doing, and we are trying to rally that country's support to our efforts.
So let's talk a bit about the EU's view of the DPRK over time. So when you first started following Korean issues from an EU perspective, how was the DPRK framed in Brussels? Was it a non-proliferation issue, a human rights issue, or mainly a regional stability issue, or a combination of these three? Curious to hear the rest? Become an NK News subscriber today for access to the full episode. Head to nknews.org/join for more information. If you're already a subscriber to NK News, you can listen to full episodes from your preferred podcast player by accessing the private podcast feed. For more detailed instructions, please see the step-by-step guide on the NK News website at nknews.org/private-feed.